All right, thank you for staying with Daybreak. So you're just in time for that discussion, and we're about to talk about the issue of the State of the Nation address. The President is expected to speak to the nation in both houses of Parliament this afternoon. What should he address? We're asking you this morning. According to you, what are the priority areas? At Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya, use the hashtag Daybreak. Joining me now in studio is Honorable Tiende Amolo, Member of Parliament for Areda. Thank you so much for coming through. And Dr. Pamela Odhiambo, Women Rep Migori, is joining us online. And Dr. Alfred Mutua, Governor for Machakos, will also be joining us online in just a bit. Unfortunately, Kimani Wamatangi would not make it this morning, but we're talking about the State of the Nation address. Before we get into that, Honorable Tiende, you just returned from the U.S. as an international observer of the elections. What is your general review?
Well, my review of the elections in the U.S. is that it was credible. And the election went on peacefully as usual. The challenges that they appear to have faced 4 years ago in terms of interference were largely dealt with. And the way they dealt with it was by having standalone machines that were not connected to the internet. In all the stations that we visited, there did not appear to be any claim of any irregularity. But the assessment, the overall assessment, and I even tweeted about this, is that the outcome was credible and, in my view, from a legal perspective, is unlikely to be subject to nullification.
Yeah, but the President, Donald Trump, is saying that the observers here were not allowed into the counting rooms. He says, I won the election, got 71 million legal votes. Bad things happened, which our observers were not allowed to see, never happened before. Millions of mail-in ballots were sent to people who never asked for them. This is a direct tweet from
First
Donald
of all, you will understand that in the U.S., in most election stations, there are no observers. You'll be surprised to know that I personally visited about 15 stations. Only in one did I meet one observer, and it was not an observer, it's what we call an election watcher. That is one of, a party functionary just moving from place to place. Yeah. Because of the credibility, they do not find it necessary to have keen observation. It's only now at the state level that the question of observers and watchers comes in. And secondly, I think where the issue arose primarily was in Pennsylvania, where they went to court and the court ordered that the observers and watchers actually be allowed. Now, they were allowed. The issue was not whether they were allowed. The issue was the distance from where the counting was. In all these stations, they would designate for you where the observers stay, but they needed to be nearer. But having said that, at the end of the day, in an election such as this, the credibility will not turn on how far the election observer was. It turns on whether there were actually any irregularities that can be demonstrated. And that has to be demonstrated at the state level before you come to the federal level. Yeah. The review, in my view, the process is fairly foolproof. That if out of perhaps about 1 million votes, if you are to find irregularities, it would probably be in 10 votes. But you see, that is too low a threshold to interfere with the overall outcome, especially once you meet the threshold of the 270. Yes.
You know, Donald Trump, in the barrage of tweets, I'm sure we wouldn't go through all of them. There's another one here just 3 hours ago where he says, nobody wants to report that in Pennsylvania and Michigan didn't allow our poll watchers or the vote observers to watch or even observe. This is responsible for hundreds of thousands of votes that should not be allowed to be counted. Therefore, I easily won both states.
Well, let's just say that I think President Trump's view of these elections makes some of our elections look like sainthoods. And I think it makes many of our countries look not so bad. Because quite honestly, the U.S. electoral system is fairly foolproof. And the question of massive irregularities can hardly arise. The major issue that President Trump had, even before the elections, was what they call the mail-in voters, which is a concept which can only work in the US or other countries, certainly can't work here. But the point is, the country as a whole allows it, I think with the exception of 2 states. They allow voters to get their ballots by post and send it back by post, provided it arrives at least by the election date. And so you can now not begin to question a system that has always been there and which many people took advantage of because many people feared coming to the polling stations because of COVID and then said that's an irregularity. Because the mail-in votes, they are for both Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah.
So you cannot cite that as a major irregularity.
Yeah.
I think that it appears the Republicans made a strategic mistake because they encouraged the Republicans to go and vote in person, while many Democrats chose to vote by mail. And they had hoped that they would get court orders that would stop the counting of the mail-in vote.
Yeah.
But most courts, in fact, all the courts refused to give those orders. Yeah. Now, that cannot be an irregularity when it's allowed by law. Yeah. So overall, I mean, in every election, there will always be an issue here and there. But my overall view, from what I saw and from my review, is that it was quite legitimate.
Yeah.
I think the challenge that is now coming is that the US has tended to rely on norms and customs more than written down law in terms of presidential transitions. And I think that for over 150 years, they have not imagined that they would come to a situation when the sitting president refuses or is reluctant to allow transition. And that's
even
what they're going to have to face.
He's not conceding.
Absolutely.
He refused to concede. But is it even necessary for him to concede?
The law does not require him to concede.
Okay.
Once it is declared, you know, the process takes effect. I think it's a challenge in terms of the incoming president because then a lot of things are delayed and a lot of things can also be done and can go wrong in the transitional period. Yeah. But overall, I guess it's a lesson for everyone. And as I told a lot of even the observers from there, you know, elections is a challenge anywhere. And so even we have our challenges that we have to deal with just as much as the US and other people have their own challenges.
All right.
Yes.
All right, brilliant. Let's switch gears now and talk about the state of the nation. That is happening this afternoon. Let me bring in Dr. Pamela Odhiambo, Women Rep Migori, on this conversation. Dr. Pamela, what should the president focus on this afternoon?
Good morning, Trevor, and welcome back, Honorable Tiende.
Good morning.
Allow me first to congratulate the President and the Vice President-elect of the United States of America, Joe Biden and Kamala. I'm very proud of Kamala as a woman. And also allow me to say pole to the many families that are suffering issues of kidney, and I hope some help will come through for them. Having said that, today, as I wait for the president to address the nation, I know everything in Kenya is important, but just to say what my priorities would be, I think the president should give us a clear roadmap to economic recovery plan for the country, having suffered the COVID-19 pandemic and all those distortion of businesses, and the country has suffered a significant economic loss. And I think we need to hear and focus on a very clear plan that can guide the nation towards economic recovery. Number two, I think, to me, the health sector becomes a serious priority. Despite the pandemic that we've been struggling with, we have seen very chaotic scenarios in the health sectors, especially the doctors and nurses strikes and the lack of facilities in hospitals. I think the president needs to come up with a very serious sort of mandatory minimum, irreducible minimums that national facilities and even county facilities must have. I think a healing nation is a dying nation, and so when we are healthy, then we can also be participating in that economic recovery, so the wealth creation will follow. Yeah. Thirdly, I am very much concerned about the area of education. I know, again, this year, the COVID-19 pandemic has really interfered with the programs of education, and much as we have implemented the first return to school formula for our children, quite a number of young people out there are very anxious. I expect the president to give a very detailed, reassuring plan to our young people, and even also how to fund this education, because majority of families are crying over no money, and so next year, as we children who come back to school, some of them might have to drop out because of lack of fees.
Okay. Honorable Tiende, what should you focus on today?
Well, first, I agree with Dr. Diambo on those issues. Under Article 132 of the Constitution, when the President addresses the nation, he's supposed to focus, at least under the Constitution, on the issue of national values under Article 10, and also on the obligations of the country, international obligations. Now, if you then go to Article 10, you find it covers issues such as good governance, patriotism, national unity, devolution, democracy. Largely, most of the issues in Article 10 reflect the 9 agenda items of the BBI. And that therefore inevitably means that in addition to covering the issues like education and issues like the economy, the President will then have to come to the issue of the BBI and how it achieves the Article 10 requirements. Separately, I think generally the President cannot escape covering the COVID situation, because all the other issues then come under the COVID, whether it's education, whether it's the economy, whether it's security, whether it's health, all of them come under COVID. So I really expect that the President will cover those two also.
Yeah, but now let's talk about the BBI for a bit. Does it really address all those 9 points in your view?
In my view, it addresses the 9 points in different ways.
Okay.
Some of the 9 points are issues which can only be addressed to a limited extent by law. Some of them are attitudinal issues. There are also aspects which are administrative and policies, but then there are some which are constitutional. Yeah. The mistake most people have tended to make is that they want to see each of the 9 points in the proposed amendments to the Constitution. You must remember that this team, the approach they had, which was reasonable, and in fact that was their mandate, was to validate the views that were received earlier. Yeah. And having validated it, to organize them in terms of constitutional amendments, in terms of statutory amendments, in terms of policy formulations, and in terms of administrative interventions that would be required. The last two, policy and administrative, is an ongoing thing, you know, and the report dedicates a lot of ink to that. The second, which is in terms of statutory amendments, is one that will follow if the Constitution goes through in a referendum or not. But then there are those which then are on the face of the Constitution. It's not that they were not there earlier, but the team has endeavored to strengthen areas that they think needed strengthening.
Okay. Let me bring Dr. Pamela on this. Dr. Pamela, how do we achieve consensus with the BBI? We'll come and talk about all the issues that you've talked about, but let's start off with the BBI, then come to education and COVID-19.
Achieving consensus on the BBI, to me, is not a very difficult thing. Like Honorable Tiende has mentioned, the challenge that we are having as Kenyans, one, is that everybody feels like the document of the BBI should articulate or should point out or include all those finer details of every form of intervention that is required. Number two, majority of the Kenyans, we have this tendency of just wanting to talk and refute things even before we understand what they are all about. And I think building consensus in this on these documents simply requires that we get to know that even us as human beings, we are in the process of becoming. Not any of us can claim to have become what they really would wish to become. And therefore, even if somebody sees like maybe still something is amiss here, there is always an opportunity to improve on everything that we are doing. And therefore, just taking hard stance of no or yes, without thinking that even as we, sorry for my teaching background, but for PhDs, we mark something called thesis. And there is no thesis that I've seen that has been given 100% right. There is always some gap for research. And even in this document of ours, Kenyans need to know that we may not be able to include each and every minor detail in this document, but as Otiende has explained, some of them will require legislative intervention, statutory policy, and administrative. Yeah. So if we look at it that way, then we can give room for all these things. For example, the actual document to take us to the referendum, the draft bills, have not been made. And therefore, Kenyans cannot claim that whatever is suggested, a summary of what is suggested here, is not yet covered, because once we have the draft amendment, then we will have those details in them.
Okay. But I see you have the BBI report with you there. Have you seen any gaps that are major?
Yeah, let me emphasize something Dr. Diamba said before I come to that. The idea of consensus. You know, this thing is overrated.
Yeah.
I hear people talking of a non-contested referendum. Trevor, there can be nothing like a non-contested referendum, because even one person is allowed to vote no, and that is a contest. And that's what the Constitution encourages. Now, so while consensus is to be encouraged, it is not mandatory, because that is the essence of democracy. Yeah. Democracy means that once an amendment is proposed and you look at it and you see that it's an improvement, then you vote yes. If you think it is not, you vote no, and you remain with the current constitution. So what must be understood first is that anytime there's an amendment, like in 2010, the current constitution improved the earlier constitution, and 67% of Kenyans thought so, and they voted yes. In 2005, most of them thought it was not an improvement, and they voted no. So as long as you read the document and you see that it improves the current document significantly more than it demolishes it, then you vote yes. Because if it's not that it has to have everything that you need. Yeah. Because even if you vote no for that reason, then you remain with the current one. Yeah. Now, secondly, you must know that there are two classes of people who come to intervene seeking to improve the document. Yeah. One are those who are opposed to the idea from the word go. They were opposed to the handshake. They were opposed to the 9-point agenda. They were opposed to appointment of the team. They were opposed to the process, and they swore they will not appear. When the first report came out, they were opposed and they did not even appear at the launch. When then they were given an additional period for validation, they did not appear. And then once the document is now out, they say, no, we need consensus. Yeah. Those are not people that are looking for consensus. Those are people who are looking to derail it. Okay. The only people that should be considered are those who support the idea and probably even gave views on the idea, and either of two things happened. Either one, the proposal was not taken, and now they're asking why. Now, for them, it must be explained to them that it was not taken, perhaps because they were also opposing views or because of some legal principle. So, those who want changes in principle cannot come now, really. But those who want improvement, either because of clarity or some technical legal conformity issues, those ones are to be considered. Do I think there are gaps? You know, it is only the Bible where even if you identify a gap, you cannot edit or amend. So there is no human document that cannot have gaps. Our 1963 Constitution had gaps. By the time we changed it in 2010, it had been amended about 63 times. Yeah. So you could say those are 63 gaps. In 2010, the document we produced in the harmonized draft was changed in certain respects, by Parliament especially. And so the document that was passed is not the original one we had intended. Yeah. So of course it also has gaps. Yeah. And therefore, even this document will have gaps. But the question is not whether it has gaps. Yeah. The question whether those gaps are so fundamental that it makes the document flawed, fundamentally flawed, and the answer is no. Okay. In my view, there's an opportunity right now, but a very small opportunity, to fill in any gaps in terms of clerical errors, for example, or in terms of clarity, if there's a point that does not appear to come out clearly legally, or in terms of what you'd call legal consistency. Those ones can usually be done, but it's a very small window. And you don't do them by going to address a press conference, because who are you addressing? The team has been there for 2 years and 8 months. Yeah. Some people forget that. When you now want to reopen the entire document, and we only have less than 2 years to elections, then when will this consensus building, stop? Okay. You can only do it by going to the initiators, either by memorandum or in person, and in good faith, not to derail it, then of course it can be considered. Because any consideration can only be had now before the final bill is presented to the IBC for, with the 1 million signatures.
Okay, let me bring in Dr. Alfred Mutua on this, the Machakos governor. Dr. Mutua, we were talking about the state of the nation and what the president should address before you joined us. What do you think should be his priorities now?
For me, I think the priority is jumpstarting the economy, because at the end of the day, it's all about money. And as you see where the economy is, it's about him being able to show people that the BBI, all these steps that we are taking, are going to improve the economy and improve the welfare of the people. So I would really concentrate on the economy, because what happened to his Agenda 4? We need to get it back on track. The BBI is very important, and I like what my friend is talking about, and that is the fact that it has gone through a process, and it is the same people who've been opposed to it who are still opposed to it. I think he's being polite. Basically, he's basically saying DP William Ruto has from the very beginning been opposed to it. And so you can see that he's saying that he wants more discussions to be held, more things to be held, so you can draw it all out. So there are people who are really opposed to it. And so we have to understand that, as he said, nothing is perfect and amendments will be done all the time. The third thing is about the high cost of treatment of COVID patients. There's a big challenge in this country. A friend of mine was hospitalized at Kenyatta University and paid 40,000, for actually 58,000 now to be released. And then I'm thinking, this is a person who can we can raise some money for him. What about that poor person who lives in Kibera, Kawangware, where he grew up? What about that poor person in this country who earns 10, 15,000 a month, even 30,000 a month, has children? Who will pay for them? So I think the president should look seriously and decide that the government is going to pay for all COVID patients in government hospitals. You don't choose to get COVID. At times people get COVID, they don't know where they got it from. So that's a very high cost. Then we need to tell the private sector, you cannot make money out of this pandemic, because that is what they're doing. So those are the three areas that I would concentrate on.
Okay, so now we had already started talking about the issue of the BBI and how do we get consensus from it? Because even though you say that some of them were opposed from the onset, don't they have valid reasons for opposing?
No, they have valid reason, and there's always be valid reasons for opposing. I think the first one was instinct, where they felt that the BBI was used to curtail their dreams of becoming presidents of this country. There's some people, William Ruto has been campaigning from the word go to be the president. When Uhuru was working from 2013, he's been campaigning. And so for him, everything is all about the presidency. But, he has to realize that the constitution is not made for him or for Raila or for Uhuru or for Mutua, because I'm also running to be president. It's made for our children. It's made for generations to come. So he's been opposed. But also, as my Mheshimiwa said here, he's been opposed to the 2005, he was opposed to the 2010, he's opposed to this one. So we are kind of used to it. So there are things that can be fixed. He's a habitual opposer. There are things that can be fixed, and they'll be fixed. The question that we need to ask as Kenyans, if you look at this document, wholesome, is it going to improve our way of life or not? Is it going to make Kenya better or not? And from my perspective, having read it several times, yes, the future and amendments will continue to be made even 200 years when all of us are not here.
Okay. Dr. Pamela Odhiambo, on this issue of the BBI, before we move into the other conversations on economy and education and the youth, will this document really improve the lives of the common mwananchi? And how?
Yes. Yes, this document as it is, I concur with my colleagues, Honorable Mutua there and Honorable Tiende. This document is an improvement. Even as we are talking about the issue of economy, for example, what has been happening in Kenya? Why are we all so poor? Many of us, our young people, leave colleges and universities and they are relying on white-collar jobs, and these jobs are no more. So if you look at this document, for example, you look at, I think the preliminary pages, page 11 or number 3, the Micro and Small Enterprises Amendment Bill 2020. The bill seeks to amend the Micro and Small Enterprise Act 2012 to give youth-owned enterprises a 7-year tax break and to establish business incubation centers across the country for purposes of providing business advisory. And the greatest group targeted here are the youth, women, and persons with disabilities who actually make the bracket of what I think every Kenyan refer to as the common mwananchi. If we encourage these small, what I call micro enterprises, and we give these people capital and they are given advice on how to grow them, then the lives, the living standards of all these people at the grassroots, majority of whom are women and youth, will definitely improve. And this is why when we are talking about this document, it is important to measure on those areas that are positive and are directly going to impact on people's lives or not, and not on individuals' life or position.
Okay.
So I like looking at it, even the issue of the health that I was talking about. I think this document is seeking to create and establish a health services commission, which is meant to handle the issues of doctors and health workers so that we have a stable workforce, that we don't suffer strikes every now and again. So to me, even just these two clauses or these two parts of this document make me feel that it is actually speaking improvement and not derailing what we already have.
Okay. Honorable Otienda Molo, what gaps do you see?
I would not say that there are significant gaps because it's a document that seeks to improve what we already have. There are certain things that a document by itself will not do. For example, let me give you 2 examples. One is the question of corruption. You know, even before the BBI team, we had very stringent corruption laws. In fact, I can tell you that if you count, we have almost 38 different pieces of legislation that deal with issues of corruption, integrity, and accountability. But that has not helped reduce it. Because at the end of the day, it is about our mindset. So there's so much to do. Now, if anybody wants to look at the proposed amendments to the Constitution, and you will see what they propose to tighten issues of corruption, around corruption trial and all that, okay? But that by itself, somebody might then say, how will this stop corruption? A document by itself will not stop corruption because it's embedded in our system of life. So we can only work with this and then now work with the policies and administrative measures that will then reduce corruption. Secondly, it's on the issue of national unity. Again, right from the 2010 Constitution to this document, so much is dedicated towards enhancing national unity. But does that mean we have had unity, or once we pass the amendment, we'll have unity? Again, the answer is no, because there's so much that has to be done. So what this document does, it improves on the 2010 Constitution in terms of bringing certain measures that will basically compel you towards unity. So that, for example, if you are employing, a certain percentage of employees should not be from one particular ethnicity. So it forces you to address that thing of national unity. So those are things that one would say they are gaps, but they are not gaps. They are just things that must now to be supplemented through legislation, through policy, and through administrative measures. The question you asked Dr. Diambo, if one was to demonstrate how this document improves the lives of the ordinary mwananchi, then we will look virtually at every article. Because every article works towards that. If you take the question of inclusivity, for example, how does it improve the life of the ordinary mwananchi? The fact that every 5 years we have elections, they are disputed, one half of the country feel they've won, the other half feel they've lost, and they remain like that for 5 years is a loss to mwananchi. To have a proposal that makes the winner not take all, and even the loser still be part of government is a win to mwananchi in terms of inclusivity. And if If we come to that, I would demonstrate. There are those who say that this document is actually entrenching imperial powers of the presidency.
In fact, that's what nonsense. I was just about to bring up.
Let me demonstrate that then, before I go to the other one.
Yeah.
The idea of imperial presidency is an idea we had in our constitution before 2010. And what we did then was to decentralize the powers of the president. Some we took to parliament, some we took to counties, some we took to independent commissions. But despite that, the president has still retained a significant amount of powers. And it's just the president alone. To have a system, and we had proposed that in a harmonized draft, that has the president, a deputy, a prime minister, and 2 deputies, in itself already decentralizes those powers. Because you are taking powers which were exercised by 1 person, and you are now distributing it among 5. How can that be entrenching the imperial presidency? In fact, it's disintegrating it. Secondly, you have a situation where the prime minister is given certain identified duties. He is the coordinator of government business. He is the leader of government business in the National Assembly. He is also the one to assign further powers to the deputies. So in other words, all these powers that the prime minister is going to exercise, they are coming from the president. When you are taking powers from you and delegating to others, how can one say that you are consolidating them back? In fact, it's the exact opposite. Okay, so it actually is a system that decentralizes that power. Thirdly, you are now bringing the loser in the presidential race to be a leader in parliament. And in fact, to rank second in that sense after the prime minister. And you see, parliament in itself is an arm of government. Sometimes people talk as if it's only the executive that is an arm of government. It's the executive, there's parliament, there's judiciary, and then the independent bodies and commissions. So when the person who has lost does not stay out in the cold, but is part of an arm of government and actually ranks second, there's a sense of inclusivity. But it's also important to know that, and you can look at this, when are the times we have had some relative calm and progress in this country? Although it was not well entrenched in the Constitution, it was when we had the government of national unity. Why? Because by definition, whenever you have these prime positions, the nature of our politics is such that they will never reside in one tribe or region. The fact of distribution of this alone makes people have a sense of inclusivity, and that reduces the tensions, and that helps all of us.
Yes. Let me bring in Dr. Pamela on this. And Dr. Diambo, the issue of representation, you wanted to jump in on this. Are you satisfied with how the women have been represented in this BBI?
Thank you, Ado. I wanted just to request to highlight or to extend that point of inclusivity. You know, the representation is good enough. To me, from where I sit, I see an improvement. For example, if I'm talking about that inclusivity, this document proposes that even at the grassroots, as parties nominate people who represent them in the general election from the constituencies, from the wards, and even counties, there is a list which is supposed to be composed not of one gender. For example, there should be 1/3 of the women, whether they are women with disability or not. The youth must be included and something like that. And so with that, the women, persons with disability, the youth have been majorly included in this document, as opposed to the one that we already have, which only created some position, which will also have a sunset clause for the women representatives. Only one woman from the county was assured of their seat. But this other one is giving us a seat at the Senate. So at the Senate, we will actually have already gender parity 50-50. Then at the county level, the deputy governor or the governor of opposite sex, that would also ensure some gender parity at the county level. And then at the National Assembly, which many people want to confuse the women that we have lost. I say no, we have not lost. We have already women who have single constituencies already elected, about 23 or so of them. And then these parties will be compelled by this document to do their nominations such that more of these constituencies, they will be represented by women and persons with disability and that kind of arrangement. With that, we are going to gain more seats, even in the National Assembly. And in fact, there is even one more clause that if the number shall have not reached the threshold, why, like the reason why Justice Maraga is voting for the dissolution of the parliament, there would be still a top-up position for. So the inclusivity is well expressed here. The representation is well expressed. It is an improvement, like just like Honorable Tiende has alluded, that at that stage, when the women seat was seen to be including the women and giving them an express seat to parliament. This one is building on that to even create more opportunities and more chances for the women, persons with disability, and the youth of this nation. So
right.
I feel it is an improvement, and this is the truth that the women down there need to know. Some of these people who claim that it is a loss to the women, I say no. And the real document that I have here speaks what I've just said. And that is the truth.
All right, on that note, let's take a quick break here on Daybreak. When we come back, we talk about the other pending issues, the economy, recovery, education, COVID-19, how it has been handled as we await the State of the Nation address. We'd also like to hear from you. What are the priority areas according to you? What should be the president address? I see there's quite some feedback coming through here. I'll read them right after this break.